and welcome to the 6th episode of the Co-Political Podcast. I'm your host, October, and I'm here with...
Hayden, I'm another one of your hosts.
Yes, indeed, as per usual. So, today's agenda, we are analysing, we are breaking down for you the Liberal Democrats' Manifesto.
Yes.
Hayden, would you like to explain a little about the Lib Dems of the UK? Go on.
So, the Lib Dems, they are considered the third party, at least in England. In Scotland and Wales, you might have local parties you may consider to be your third party, but they're considered England's third party in British politics. They tend to be more towards the centre, and they lean progressive on many issues, as well as being very globalist. I mean, they were a big proponent of rejoining the EU around Brexit times, and they tend to be a middle ground between Labour and the Conservatives. So that is your brief introduction into what the Lib Dems stand for. Now, October, could you take us through what are their key points, like summarise the headline policies of their manifesto?
Yes, so the Lib Dems' current flagship policies, called by them quite nicely a fair deal, their fair deal for the country. Some of these include investment in renewable power and home insulation to drive economic recovery, bring down energy bills and create new jobs, the right to see a GP within 7 days or 24 hours if urgent, a ban on water companies dumping raw sewage into rivers, lakes or coastal areas, which is direly needed if I do say so myself, stronger relationships with Europe, and electoral reform in the sense of moving away from our current system of first past the post, switching to proportional representation, as well as introducing caps on donations to political parties from third-party
A quick
sources.
note, first past the post is the electoral system we use in the UK, where you just vote for one candidate. There'll be more information about the Lib Dems' proposals on electoral reform later in the episode.
Yes,
but
indeed.
October, firstly, tell us your thoughts.
I think a lot of these flagship policies are, well, as you mentioned, they are rather progressive. They are quite direly needed, especially to do with the NHS and notably, as I mentioned, water companies, because quite frankly, our waters are murky.
Yes,
I think
it seems like one of the Lib Dems' main target areas was water companies and sewage. I mean, I believe it was a Freedom of Information request from them that first revealed the scale of the sewage scandal. So it makes only sense that they are focusing on that as a policy. And I do think it's a pertinent issue with voters, particularly in coastal areas and areas with lots of rivers and just nature in general, so I think it could definitely sway a few voters into voting Liberal Democrat.
Certainly, and I think I mentioned in the last episode or two, the River Medway, which I see basically on a day-to-day basis, is rancid, and that goes for a lot of the country. People can't swim in our seas or play in our lakes anymore, because they are grim, frankly, so I think change like that is needed, and
exactly.
Here comes the plug. If you want these put into place, you've got to go and vote on the 4th of July.
The general election is this week, Thursday, 4th of July.
Indeed.
Make sure you have the date saved in your calendar. Set aside 5 minutes for you to take a trip down to your local polling station and vote, because these issues won't change unless you vote for change.
Most certainly. Now, let's
bring photo ID.
Yes, bring photographic identification.
Yes.
There's info on government websites. Hayden, would you like to tell them where to find this info?
If you've got a passport, if you've got a driver's licence, or if you've got any card with a pass emblem, which is known as a pass card, you'll be fine. Bring one of those. It can be expired as long as it looks like you.
Certainly. Now, shall we move on to the first chunk of the Liberal Democrats' policies? Hayden, I pass to you to talk about the economy.
Yes, the economy. So, they want to introduce a new home energy upgrade programme to provide long-term help with the cost of living by cutting energy bills. They'll invest in green infrastructure, innovation and skills. They'll ensure that day-to-day spending does not exceed money raised by taxes. They'll give more resources to HMRC to tackle tax avoidance and evasion. And they'll reverse tax cuts for big banks and impose a one-off windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas producers and traders. October, what do you think?
Pretty decent overall. I'll be honest, the economy is not my strong point. I'm much more of a social politician.
On the economy, I do think it's interesting that they talk about ensuring that day-to-day spending does not exceed money raised by taxes. I mean, that's a point we've seen raised by all the major parties so far. It seems like after the disaster that was Liz Truss's mini budget, and
Indeed.
after
mini rain too.
and after our frankly dire economic state, it seems parties are being very careful with how they'll spend public money. And I also think it's legacy of the many scandals in COVID with VIP lanes and corruption. I think it's the legacy of that not specifically Partygate, but more of the money spending side of things the money side of things. And I think parties are careful to be like, we're not going to be like them.
Certainly.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's all I have to say on the economy.
What about business and jobs? Can you tell us about it?
Indeed, I can. So, the Liberal Democrats proposed policies within their manifesto on business and jobs. The Lib Dems want to bring down trade barriers by fixing our broken relationship with Europe. Quite dire, if I do say so myself. They want to increase the availability of apprenticeships and careers advice for young people. Empower more people to enter the job market by making the most of technology and new ways of working. I'd assume things like AI come under that?
It didn't specify. I assumed more hybrid work, and they do talk later on about giving people the right to hybrid work and giving disabled people the right to work from home where the job role allows it. So I'd assume it's more that front.
I see. Well, on top of that, Lib Dems want to abolish business rates, such as council tax on non-domestic properties.
Yes, so business rates is basically if you own a shop or any sort of business like a restaurant, instead of paying council tax, which I'm sure many people are familiar with, you'll pay a different thing called business rates. The Lib Dems want to abolish it to benefit small businesses.
Fair enough, that's cool. And on top of that, they want to replace these business rates with a commercial landowner levy to benefit small businesses, as you just said. And finally, they want to introduce a general duty of care for the environment and human rights in business operations and supply chains. Any thoughts?
Well, I think bringing down trade barriers by fixing our broken relationship with Europe is something that we desperately need as a country. I mean, Europe is one of, if not our biggest trading partner, and lots of our exporting and importing happens with them.
Definitely.
And the current fees and taxes that are in place are extortionate. So as soon as we can get those deals in that fix that relationship, I think we'll see a marked change in our economic recovery and in our just the state of public finances.
Certainly.
And also, I think it's good that they're looking at young people with increasing the availability of apprenticeship and careers advice. I know many schools don't offer quality careers advice, and I do believe that improving accessibility of that will be a key change for the lives of many young people as they seek to enter the job market.
Absolutely. I don't believe there's anything I wanted to add. Again, as we mentioned in the past couple episodes, the appearance of apprenticeships gaining popularity, that's always a good thing.
Yes.
It gives people
Apprenticeships
the skills to
are
get
a great
into
scheme.
jobs. Most certainly, it gives people the skills to get into jobs straight away, learn while they're getting paid. Always a good one. Anyway, shall we move on to what is maybe my domain, climate change and energy? Take it away, Hayden.
So, these policies look at energy in relation to the climate and how we can achieve clean power. So firstly, they want to introduce a 10-year emergency upgrade program for homes, which starts with free insulation and heat pumps for those on low incomes. They'll expand incentives for homes to install solar panels, including a guaranteed fair price for energy sold back to the grid. They'll invest in renewable power, with the target of 90% of UK electricity being generated by renewables by 2030. They'll establish new national and local citizens' assemblies to give people direct involvement in the decisions made in tackling climate change. And they'll return international development spending to 0.7% of national income, with tackling climate change as a key priority for such development spending. October, your analysis on these policies.
I rather like the policy of national and local citizens' assemblies. Any sort of giving people, more local power is good in my eyes. Again, it's kind of my domain.
And I think giving people more ability to look into the insides of such decision making will reverse a lot of, because I feel like a lot of people are very reactionarily against net zero plans because they are not the ones seeing the inside, and they just see it as an opposition to economic and financial growth. But by bringing those people in and letting them actually see the decision making of that factor, I feel like it could lead to us becoming a more pro-climate and pro-environment population.
Which is
And much
absolutely
more,
needed in this day
yes,
and age.
because it will make us much more willing to make those tough decisions to further progress to halt climate change. And I think that is something that's desperately needed.
Most certainly. I believe that's about all I have to say
Yes,
on it.
so tell us, health and care, which I believe is a key policy for the Liberal Democrats,
Yep.
with Ed Davey himself, the leader, emphasising his experience as a carer.
Yes, indeed. So, health and care under the Liberal Democrats. A flagship policy to start with. As priorly mentioned, the right to see a GP in 7 days or in 24 hours for urgent appointments, with 8,000 more GPs to deliver on it. Very, very important indeed. There is to be guaranteed access to an NHS dentist for everyone needing urgent and emergency care, dental-wise. There is to be new mental health hubs for young people in every community and regular mental health checkups at key points in people's lives. There's to be a guarantee for 100% of cancer patients to start treatment within 62 days of urgent referral. Free personal care based on the model introduced in Scotland in 2002, where provision is provided on need and not ability to pay. There's to be higher minimum wage for carers and unpaid carers to get paid carers leave, and a guarantee of regular respite breaks. I believe that's how I say that.
Respite.
Respite breaks.
Yes.
Well, before I ask your thoughts, Hayden, the policy of cancer patients getting treatment, that is quite important to me.
Yes.
My father is, well, I want to say had cancer. He's had his treatment. He's doing pretty well. It's
Good to hear.
Indeed, it's absolutely vital that these people get the treatment they need.
Yes,
There was...
it's life-changing if they
Yes.
get it in time as opposed to too late. And I think the
Certainly.
current waiting lists are unacceptable, and it's good to see that they're aiming to shorten that. I don't know the logic behind 62 days, but it feels like in the current state of affairs that 62 days is actually pretty short.
Yes, indeed.
The only thing I'd say is urgent referral. I don't know what that would mean for actual cancer patients. I don't know where the distinction for urgent referral lies, so I can't comment on exactly how many people would come under that, but it's good to see nonetheless that progress is starting to be looked at in this area.
Certainly, and I believe on one news channel or another, there was someone speaking out against the state of affairs with the NHS and cancer treatment, notably against the Conservatives. Saying that because of them, waiting lists are too long. He has
Yes.
been cut down to a few months left to live, and with change to that, it's going to be life-changing, obviously.
I think both parties have played on that, because I've seen marketing material from both Labour and the Liberal Democrats, notably not the Conservatives,
No.
where cancer patients actually speak directly and say, I believe X party would have saved my life if they're in power, but because of the Conservative government, I've now got X months to live, which is very powerful advertising and does
Certainly.
play on how shocking the situation has become. And of course, it's party political broadcasting, so you can take it with a grain of salt, if
Yes,
you will.
indeed.
But it still does show the state of affairs that we're getting to that point where that advertising is poignant and makes a fair point on the state of affairs.
Most certainly. Anything else you'd like to add on these policies?
New mental health hubs for young people in every community is sorely needed. Interestingly that they went for mental health hubs and not youth hubs. I think it's better if we see more general activity around youth hubs and youth clubs and things like that. But it's good to see that progress is being aimed for in this region nonetheless. I mean, quick little secret on the podcast. I have spoken to Ed Davey, and he's a big proponent of youth hubs. So yes, so I managed to get a question in edgeways, and he said he's a big proponent of youth hubs because they prevent crime and boost mental health. But it's interesting to see the semantics in this policy that it's mental health hubs and not youth hubs.
We've got an inside man on the podcast as one of our hosts. You heard it here first, folks. That's cool.
It's the only question I asked Ed Davey about, so unfortunately, I don't have much more insight to share on that, but it is good to hear that they're committing to supporting youth clubs and youth hubs.
Indeed.
You've heard it here first, folks.
You have. Well, that's all I have to say on that. I will pass back to you, Hayden, for the state of education under the Lib Dems.
Yes, so the Lib Dems, if they were in power, they'd ensure a dedicated, qualified mental health professional in every primary and secondary school. They'd increase school and college funding per pupil above the rate of inflation every year. They'd institute a tutoring guarantee for every disadvantaged people who need extra support. They'd reinstate maintenance grants for disabled students at university. And they'll introduce a new lifelong skills grant with every adult receiving £5,000 to spend on education and training throughout their life, with an aim to increase this to £10,000 when public finances allow. October, tell us, what do you think?
Their first policy under this section is absolutely key, as kind of ties
The
into what I
dedicated
was
qualified
just saying.
mental health professional, yes.
Vitally needed. I speak from my own experience. I didn't have that provision when I was back in school, which I've only just left, thank the Lord. It wasn't there, and I could have benefited. I think a lot of people will absolutely benefit if this policy is put into place. But remember, second plug, you can only get the change you want if you like this manifesto or any others if you go to vote on the 4th of July.
I think the folks have got the message by now, I'll be honest.
They better.
But I do think also that policy would reduce inequality, because I know some schools, especially more well-off schools, do have counsellors on site and do have staff trained to support in such circumstances, but many schools don't, and there's that inequality in access to support. So by ensuring that every school has at least one mental health professional would level the playing field on mental health and mean that more disadvantaged students who might not go to those more well-off schools that have that support are able to be on an equal level to their counterparts.
Certainly. Well said.
Anyway, October, an area we both know very well about. Can you tell us about families, children and young people?
Yes, indeed I can. Under the Liberal Democrats, there are plans to expand free school meals for all children in poverty, with an aim of extending them to all children when public finances allow. There's to be a new cabinet minister elected for children and young people, statutory maternity and shared parental pay to be doubled to £350 per week, with all parental pay and leave as well to be made day one rights and extended to self-employed parents, as well as a return to the Erasmus Plus programme.
Yes.
Would you like to explain what that is for our listeners?
The Erasmus Plus programme is a programme created by the European Union, which allows students from any participating countries to go to universities in other countries to study abroad. We notably pulled out of this when we left the EU. There's been an attempt to recreate it by the Conservative government through, I believe, what's called the Turing programme, but that was generally considered to be unsuccessful, so a return to Erasmus Plus would mean students in unis in the UK being able to study abroad throughout Europe.
Lovely.
That is the Erasmus Plus programme. When it comes to my thoughts on the policies, I'm very glad that they're advocating for a cabinet minister for children and young people, as it's only right that we have someone in government to stand up for us, given the fact we can't vote, and the fact that they want to aim for extending, I know it's not a commitment, but the fact they are willing to aim at extending free school meals to all children and young people, that was a key policy in UK Youth Parliament and one I was very passionate about, and it's glad to see that political parties are beginning to pick it up as, a sensible idea and one that's desperately needed in society, especially for those right on the cusp of getting free school meals who may not have the money to afford regular school lunches but aren't poor enough to qualify for the free school meal funding.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, I'm currently doing work on free school meals and tackling poverty within Kent Youth County Council. Can't really say how it's going, but yeah, it's a really good policy to have in place. I think, people have to go to school. There's no point making people pay more because, I certainly pay a lot, or paid a lot rather, for transport, having to pay for food as well. It's a lot. And
yes,
it's silly. So
definitely,
yeah,
it is
explained.
Quite ridiculous.
Yes, indeed.
But alas, alack, we move on
Yes.
to pensions and the safety net.
Indeed, take it away, Hayden.
They seek to remove the two-child limit and the benefit cap. So the two-child limit is if you have child benefit, it is removed after the second child. There is a target to end deep poverty, which is living with an income below 50% of the poverty threshold within a decade. There'll be a new independent commission to recommend further annual increases to universal credit. They'll retain the triple lock so that pensions always rise in line with inflation, wages, or 2.5%, whichever is highest. And carers' allowance is to be increased and expanded to more carers.
Yes, indeed.
So, October, tell us.
Well, I like that last policy very much.
Yes. The Lib Dems are very
Yes.
passionate on carers'
Naturally,
rights.
that's Ed Davey's
yeah.
influence, isn't it?
Ed Davey himself, for the party's political broadcast, talked about his experience caring for both his son and also other members in his family. He's spent a lot of his time caring and notably balances the job of being both party leader, constituency politician and carer, which has trickled down into the rest of the Lib Dems, as they are a party who are very passionate for improving the lives of carers across the UK.
Yes, indeed. And the removal of the 2-child limit and benefit cap, really important. That's been quite the subject of debate in recent political news. It's cruel, frankly. It is a cruel policy, and parents need more support when more children are in a household. So, yeah, it feels like something that should just be scrapped. And I personally would like to see it scrapped under the next government.
I would entirely agree. Anyway, October. Would you like to move us on to crime and policing?
Yes, indeed I would. Before I do, you can cut this out. There is a moth in my sodding room. It's terrorising me. So, under the Lib Dems, there will be a guarantee that all burglaries are attended by police and fully investigated. There will be more investment in the criminal justice system to tackle the backlog of court cases. There'll be improvements to rehabilitation within prisons and strengthened supervision of officers within the community, as well as mandatory training for police and prosecutors in understanding the impact of trauma on survivors. Very, very important. I mentioned in our last episode.
Yes.
I think that is absolutely vital for folks like me, for folks that have gone through worse. Naturally, my area is child abuse and child sexual abuse crimes. So it would be nice to see improvement in that area. Hayden, any further thoughts?
So, on crime and policing, I do think it's good that all burglaries are attended by police and investigated. However, I don't know if that's one of voters' key issues per se. I haven't heard much of a fuss about burglaries.
Yeah.
I do think it's important that police do attend and do check out each crime, but I don't think it's on the top of the voters' minds right now.
No, perhaps
but
not flagship as of current.
It's not flagship, but it's good to see. And there needs to be desperate investment in the courts to tackle the backlog. I mean, I know there's been cases of people waiting vast periods of time that are simply ridiculous just to get a court case resolved. So it's good to see. And as you were saying, the mandatory training is highly important. So
certainly.
Another great commitment.
I'm glad it's amongst prosecutors as well, so I assume judges and barristers and whatnot. Because I don't know personally, but I do assume cases, maybe such as mine, if it does go ahead, might be quite harsh on the victim, would be quite harsh on me. So, definitely a good thing to see.
It's good that they're concentrating on all aspects. Alas,
we move on.
Natural environment, we'll talk about that. So, water companies are to be made public benefit companies, which is a type of for-profit company whose goals include making a positive impact on society. There'll be a ban on bonuses for water company bosses until sewage discharges and leaks end. Ofwat is to be replaced by a new regulator with powers to prevent sewage dumping. They'll plant at least 60 million trees a year, and there'll be a new Clean Air Act based on WHO recommendations, so that's the World Health Organization, and a new air quality agency. October!
Yes.
Please tell us, are these policies great or terrible or somewhere in between?
Yeah, they're pretty damn good. Water companies, as I mentioned, I believe is one of their flagship policies. Needs change.
Exactly.
New trees are always good. I could say something about where we're going to find the space. I don't subscribe to that. We will find the space. We do have enough room in this country for things such as
and
trees.
And on trees, I do think we need to see more trees in cities especially.
Certainly.
I mean, it reduces urban heat islands, it provides more shade, and if done right, I mean, I know there's issues in cities of trees their roots pulling out and disrupting pavement, but there are ways to prevent that, and if pavements are constructed in the right way to provide trees space to get more natural groundwater and get more rainwater, then it is a benefit for everyone in a city, and it's also a benefit for the trees. So
Certainly.
there is the space in cities.
On that point, well, similar, I have a bit of a side ramble to go on about trees that are being planted. Male trees that don't produce fruit produce pollen, which strike up hay fever.
Oh God, yes.
If female trees, I say in quotes because I don't quite know the exact biological details of trees, my A level didn't carry me that far. If trees that bore fruit were planted more often and throughout cities and towns and whatnot, it's food for people, it's less pollen, it does the environment some good. So if
Hashtag stop the sneeze and
Stop the
plant
sneeze.
female trees.
I like that. Can we fashion that? Can we patent
There's a
that?
reason I do PR. Yes. Stop the
Indeed.
sneeze, plant female trees.
Yes. So, dear listener,
We have no way of verifying October's facts, but I
That is
trust the
true.
man, so
that is
I
true
hope
in
you're
some
not
way.
lying on the podcast and lying to our
No.
dearest listeners. I
No.
can't believe you would have the gall to do that,
Sit
but I'm sure
down.
you don't.
No. But dear listener, if ever you are in any position where you are part of environment planning, female trees...
Bold assumption.
Exactly. But female trees that bear fruit are the way forward. Advocate for them. Anyway,
Indeed.
that is about
Though
life, so-
one thing I would like to say is I do think it's slightly disappointing that they're looking at making water companies public benefit companies instead of
Yes,
nationalising them.
Yeah.
I do think any company that has a natural monopoly over an area, like any utility company, should be nationalised.
Yeah.
I don't see the point of it remaining a for-profit company. While it's good that they're taking a first step in the area, I
Yeah.
don't think making it a public benefit company would benefit them. I mean, I believe from the research I did before this episode, Thames Water, notably one of the worst water companies, is actually currently a public benefit company.
And look how
So I
that's
don't know
going.
how.
There's disease in the
Yes. So I don't know how far that would go towards improving the situation. So
Yes,
if the Lib Dems, if I told the Lib Dems, if I went up to Ed Davey, shook his hand and told him to change one policy, I believe that would be it.
Yes, indeed. That is a rather questionable policy, but we
It's
must
baby
be
steps.
Yes, indeed.
Baby steps, but could be better.
Indeed. So, shall we move on to housing and community?
Yes, take it away, October.
Right. So, under the Lib Dems, there will be an increase in building of new homes to 380,000 per year, including 150,000 social homes. There will be a ban on no-fault evictions, and 3-year tenancies are to be made the default. I believe the ban on no-fault evictions is in another manifesto. Was that in Labour's?
It's in Labour's, and I believe the Conservatives also talk about it. I can't exactly remember.
Yeah.
I believe the Conservatives intended to ban it in their last manifesto, and there was progress made towards it, but I think it failed on the final hurdle of actually becoming law.
Yes,
So
it
that's
did.
why I think all three major parties, and I believe the smaller parties minus Reform, so I think the Greens do as well, commit to banning Section 21 evictions.
Interesting. Yep, of course, in British politics there is overlap. If you want to know the ins and outs, read the manifestos yourself.
Yes, we will. Each episode has a link in the description to the manifestos, including this one. I realised in the last episode, I believe I might have said labour.co.uk. The description has the right link, it's .org.uk, and the Lib Dems one we'll mention at the end of the episode, or you can skip right now.
Yes, indeed.
Read the show notes on, I don't know how you're going to read it on whatever platform, but they should be quite easy to find, and it's going to be right at the bottom.
Yes, indeed. So, to continue, under the Lib Dems, local authorities will be given the right to end right to buy in their areas. They will end rough sleeping by the next election and scrap the Vagrancy Act, in which criminalises rough sleeping, which is rather a crude policy to be put into place at any point.
So, two notes to quickly jump in. Firstly, right to buy, we've covered it previously, but it's where if you own a council house, you have the right to buy it from your council at significant discount. It's very controversial as, on one hand, it benefits the individuals exercising right to buy as it gives them independence in an easier manner, but on the other hand, it dries up the social housing supply and means that there's less social houses overall. And it's also very expensive for councils because they have to sell it on significant discount. And the Vagrancy Act is a 200-year-old act. I believe this year is the 200th anniversary of the Vagrancy Act instituted in... No, would it be 200? Hang on, I'm thinking. It is 200 years old, because it was from 1824. It criminalised rough sleeping. The Conservatives recently actually repealed it. However, they did institute a replacement law, and I believe that's what the Lib Dems are trying to scrap here.
Yes, indeed. Furthermore, there is to be more control given to communities over the number of second homes and short-term lets in their area. And finally, the Lib Dems will ensure that gigabit broadband is available to every home and business. Any thoughts?
Well, apart from what I've said, I mean, it seems like good policies. End of right to buy, I believe, is the right way to go to maintain the social housing supply, and ban a note for evictions, good. End of rough sleeping, good.
Yes.
All sounds good to me.
Don't know how the NIMBY crowd would feel about the first policy, building new homes, and a lot
Well,
of them...
the funny thing is that the Lib Dems are... They tended to be NIMBY in the past, but they've actually moved away from their NIMBY roots to be more pro-house building. And I feel like
Interesting.
in the face of the current housing crisis, it's actually good to see parties committing to more housing. And they do say they want to develop in conjunction with local communities to ensure correct developments, which I believe is the right way to go. Because on one hand, local communities shouldn't have the right to block any housing in their area. But on the other hand, housing decisions should not be imposed downward from Westminster. They should be made in conjunction with the local communities.
Most certainly.
So I believe that's probably the right way to go, and it's good to see the Lib Dems are moving away from their NIMBY roots.
Yes, indeed. Well, Hayden, I will pass you on to our next section. Again,
Yes,
your domain.
transport. So, transport. Every new car and small van sold from 2030 would be zero emission under a Lib Dem government. They would freeze rail fares and simplify ticketing. I don't know if any of you have done the trips on the East Coast Main Line, etc., or any similar train routes where there's 300 different tickets and you need to enlist 70 different pieces of software to find the cheapest. Slightly ridiculous, so good to see that we're simplifying ticketing. They'll create new walking and cycling networks and give more of the road budget to local councils to maintain existing roads, pavements and cycleways. They'll invest in research and development to make the UK a pioneer in zero-carbon flight and take steps to reduce demand for flying. Now, I do think the zero-carbon flight plan is an interesting one, as I think the way forward is actually to emphasise international rail, especially with our European counterparts, upgrading Eurostar, creating more cross-channel links, and especially with Ireland and Northern Ireland, and ensuring we have rail links with them, would be, I believe, is the way to go, as I believe zero carbon flight is still a long way off, and trains provide a solution today which are, I'm not going to say simple and easy to implement, but are tried and tested, and which will help resolve the situation when it comes to carbon in public transport. So, but it's good to see that they also want to take steps to reduce demand for flying, so there is some of that policy still there. Now, October, what are your thoughts? And also, I do think it's slightly disappointing that they aren't taking steps to nationalise the rail network. I believe that was one of Labour's best policies from their manifesto, and I believe the Lib Dems could do more in that area. They do have plans to create a more centralised operation of the rail network, but they plan to retain train companies. So, like the plan with water companies, if they were going to change one thing, well, another thing now, I'd do the water companies first, they should nationalise the rail companies. Anyway, October, tell us your thoughts.
Yes, so freezing rail fares, I would have hoped there would be focus on decreasing them, because they're really, really expensive. But hopefully that will, if they do get into power, which, one more time, you can cause, go and vote. With any luck, they will begin decreasing. A freeze for now is acceptable. Yeah, they're all pretty decent policies. That's about all I have to say for my analysis. So I'd just like to add, I think it's really good that money's being given to local councils for maintenance of roads and cycleways and whatnot. I'm all for...
I mean, the amount of potholes these days is mad.
Exactly, and, you know, I'm always all for more money, more power to local government, so that sticks out to me.
Local governments should hold a greater role in British politics than they currently do, so it's good to see. attention is being paid to that.
Most certainly. I believe that's all I have to say. Should we move on to
Yes.
immigration and asylum policy?
Yes, take it away. Tell us all about it.
So, under the Lib Dems, there will be an end to the quote-unquote hostile environment and instead invest in tackling smuggling, trafficking and modern slavery. The Lib Dems will also transfer policy decisions on work visas and overseas students out of the Home Office. They will scrap the Rwanda scheme and create new, safe and legal routes for migrants. There'll be a new standard for all but the most complex asylum decisions to be processed within 3 months, and they will lift the ban on asylum seekers working if they have been waiting on a decision for more than 3 months. Any thoughts?
Well, first of all, good to see the Rwanda scheme will be scrapped. I
Yes.
believe it is actually more expensive to send migrants to Rwanda than keep them in the UK, so it was a bit of a nonsensical policy that was mainly motivated by ideology over practicalities.
Yes, indeed.
So I think it's good to see the end of that, and also the end of the hostile environment, I believe. I just think the current asylum system has failed, where we're
certainly.
rejecting people who genuinely need help and accepting people who, may have been able to take the more safe and legal route and emigrated in a more proper manner. And I believe it's also good that, they're aiming for 3 months, and that if you have more than 3 months, you are able to start settling in, because
Absolutely.
asylum seekers shouldn't have to wait in a state of limbo for extended periods of time. They should be able to know so they can move on with their life, especially if they've been fleeing war and trauma and all
Exactly.
that stuff. Then they should be able to settle down.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that we're all human. People traveling from other countries for any reason, either just to have a better life or to get away from war and suffering, they are obviously human beings, and we have the facilities to house them, to give them work, to give them comfort. So I think this is it's a really good policy.
Shall we move on to rights and equality?
Yes, indeed.
A
Take it away.
pertinent issue. We've discussed the culture war and our perceptions of it in many an episode, and I believe this is an extension of it, and it's good to see that the Lib Dems are more progressive on the matter.
Definitely.
So we'll jump straight into it. They want to make misogyny a hate crime and give police and prosecutors more resources and training to tackle hate crimes and to support survivors. They'll institute new rights to flexible working and the right for disabled people to work from home where businesses can allow it. They'll respect and defend the rights of people of all sexual orientations and gender identities, including trans and non-binary people. They'll ban all forms of conversion therapy, and they'll scrap anti-protest laws and halt the use of live facial recognition surveillance. October. Do you think this policy holds any water, or do you think it's all empty words?
I'd like to think it's not empty words. Naturally, for people like you and me, Hayden, these are really quite important things to pay attention to. There should be sections on this in every manifesto. Make sure you check them out for yourself. Have a read into the deep details. These are rather just skimming over. I think these are all pretty good policies.
It's good to see they want to ban all forms of conversion therapy, and it's good to see that they're committed to respecting and defending the rights of people of all sexual orientations and gender identities.
Certainly.
However, I would have liked to see more on self-ID.
Yeah, that would have been something I'd like to see struck up a bit more.
Though maybe something they'll come to later. Hopefully something they'll come to later.
Yeah, with any
But it's good to see that anti-protest laws finally get a mention. I do believe the Conservatives have been rather draconian on how they deal with protests and the human right to protest, and live facial recognition surveillance is something that desperately needs to have much more strong regulation and just needs to be prohibited and have a moratorium on it, because it is one of the most disastrous things for individual privacy and liberty. And it's good to see the Liberal Democrats, liberals in the name, are very clear that they will halt the use of it immediately.
Indeed, that is rather a good policy if I do say so myself.
Next, a section that you will enjoy, October, and I'm sure many of our listeners at home will, especially the second one, so we'll have a look into it. Take it away.
Yes, political reform under the Liberal Democrats. The Lib Dems would like to introduce single transferable votes for general and local elections.
So, quick explanation for our listeners at home. Single transferable vote is where, instead of having one MP for each constituency, you have multiple, say, for example, 5, and you rank each candidate. When one candidate has received enough votes to qualify for a place, say your vote comes up and you voted for that candidate, they'll instead give you a vote to your second favourite candidate and third favourite, and so on until all 5 candidates, all 5 places have been filled, and there are 5 candidates that everyone's going to be broadly happy with. So it generally tends to be any system that elects multiple candidates per area tends to be more representative, and any system that seeks to move votes between people tends to also be more representative. And the Lib Dems are always big on PR, proportional representation, as a smaller party who generally tends to do lower in the polls, as many smaller parties are. You know, it's an issue across the political spectrum, as notably Reform also are seeking proportional representation, as well as the Greens. So it is a wide spectrum issue, and it's generally seeked more by smaller parties. I mean, the Conservatives and Labour, though, are firmly in favour of our current system, first past the post, as it obviously gives them more seats.
Yes,
anyway,
indeed.
Continue. Tell us about the rest of the policies.
To the second policy, rather a key one, scrapping voter ID, which you do need on the 4th of July when you go out to vote for change.
Yes. Make sure you have your passport, your driver's licence, full or provisional, or any pass card, or any other accepted voter ID. You can find guides available online. And if you don't, apply for an emergency proxy vote. We'll have more details on that in our episode on Wednesday the 3rd of July.
Yes, indeed. And notably, the Lib Dems want to lower the voting age to 16, as do Labour.
Yay! Well, hey, I love to see it.
Indeed we do. They want to enshrine the ministerial code into law, reform the House of Lords to introduce a proper democratic mandate. They want to oppose... Oh, that's interesting. They want to oppose Scottish independence and any second referendum. And here's another of their flagship policies, a cap on donations to political parties. I'd like to jump in with my thoughts. I don't know how I feel about opposing Scottish independence. I'm not too much of a fan of that.
I'm generally of the opinion that the union should remain together. I think we're better together than we are apart. However, I do believe the Scottish should be given a right to have their own say, because of course I live in the very south of England. I'm not party to issues faced in Scotland, and I'm sure many Scottish people are in favour of independence, as well as many Scots who aren't. It's a very divisive issue, so
yes, indeed.
Opposing Scottish independence, they're a party that covers the entirety of the UK. That's not surprising, and it's not something I'm too miffed about. But a second referendum, if that's what the people of Scotland want, then I believe they should have it. However, the other policies, such as scrapping voter ID, I'm of the firm belief that voter ID... You see, voter ID seems like a good thing. It seems like a common sense policy, but when you look into it, you realise that electoral fraud is something that rarely happens, and when it does happen, it happens on such a small scale that it won't even change a single seat or even a single ward's polling results. It probably happens once every 3 elections.
Yes, indeed.
That's just an estimate. I'm sure there's actual stats out there. So voter ID, it doesn't really make sense. It only serves to disenfranchise people who can't afford voter ID, and I know there's mechanisms to get free voter ID, but apparently Royal Mail has failed to deliver some of those voter authority certificates for this election.
As well as postal ballots, which is...
Postal ballots. Royal Mail have had plenty of issues delivering plenty of resources, including voter authority certificates. So all in all, it just disenfranchises people who may not be able to afford those IDs, because IDs are quite expensive.
Indeed, it is a rather pointless policy. It's nice to see that someone wants to scrap them. Lowering the voting age, obviously I'm in favour of that.
We've discussed that before. We're highly in favour of it.
Indeed.
The one I find interesting is the House of Lords.
Okay.
Because unlike most people, I don't think the House of Lords needs a democratic mandate.
Interesting.
I do believe it should be reformed. We should get rid of the hereditary seats, and we should get rid of seats given automatically to religious leaders. But I don't think it should be democratic for one simple reason, and that's because with a democratic system, the inherent problem is that, you know, some policies may seem like a good idea on surface, but when you dig into it, it might actually be a good idea. And I'm not saying the public's uneducated, I'm just saying many of the public don't have time to read deeply into every political issue, and that's not their fault. The good thing about the House of Lords is that those people are paid to just sit there and read through pages and pages of legislation and to consider every possible outcome. And sometimes that does go badly. I mean, because of the way the House of Lords is currently set up, it's quite the archaic system. But there are ways to do it which keeps its state as a more of a checker, being like, are you sure this is a good idea? Are you sure this is going to work in reality? And whilst also reforming it to move away from the hereditary seats and the seats held by religious leaders. So, and also the seats given by prime ministers, which I believe is not the right system. No. I believe it should just be like a house of experts per se to check over laws and say, I have expertise in X field and I believe X law that affects the field will have a negative impact, and then for those discussions to be held, because politicians are too busy making real-time decisions and snap-to-snap decisions to be able to do a deep dive into such legislation. So it helps maintain our country's stability per se.
Yeah, I think that sums it up much better than I could. I don't know quite enough on the House of Lords and the House of Commons, for that matter, to speak on it. I don't really like the idea of a non-democratic body.
Yeah.
But I'm sure
I can see why people automatically don't like it. I mean, democracy is something we all hold close to our hearts, but I believe the issue is more nuanced. And there might be ways to do it slightly democratically, but I believe remaining without like a general vote of the populace is the best way to go, because at that point it just becomes a second House of Commons, and what's the point of that?
Yes, it is interesting. Well, I think that sums up most of mine and your thoughts on it. Shall we move on to our final section of the Lib Dem Manifesto, Defence? Take it away.
Well, not the final section of the Lib Dem Manifesto. I should say that they have a few more sections of policies that we didn't want to include just for simplicity and because they were more in the weeds and technical subjects. We'll get into that after this.
Yes,
but on defence, right, the Lib Dems aim to increase regular troop numbers back to over 100,000. They want to increase defence spending each year with a goal of spending at least 2.5% of GDP on defence. GDP is the measure of the country's output. They'll maintain the UK's nuclear deterrent, and they'll control arms exports to countries with poor human rights records. And that is our coverage of the Lib Dem Manifesto. October, your thoughts on defence and your thoughts on the manifesto overall. Is it good? Is it bad? Somewhere in the middle? And is it, more importantly, realistic and achievable?
Well, that second policy of increasing defence spending, I believe that stays in line with the Conservatives and
Yes,
Labour?
Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, they all want to see defence spending at 2.5% of GDP.
Yeah, other than that, I don't really have many opinions on that, to be fair.
Fair enough. And of the whole manifesto?
Overall, I do think it's a rather strong manifesto. A lot of progressive policies, a lot of things I think a lot of the public would like to see. Yeah, I'm a decent fan of a lot of policy in there. What about you, Hayden? What do you think?
I do think it's a very strong manifesto overall. I mean, passing through the manifesto, firstly, it's the easiest manifesto to read so far. If I had to rank it, Labour's was the worst, as it was literally just blocks of text with policies thrown in between. The Conservatives did slightly better as they bolded their policies, but their headings were very unclear and, a lot of text, and it could have been simplified. But the Lib Dems, for the previous two manifestos, we've had to change our headings, but for this one we've kept them largely the same, because the Lib Dems have headings that make sense, and they've just got, at the start of each section, a list of their key policies in bold, which I've mainly used as the basis for this episode. So if you do commit to reading at least one, and you just want to read the one that's the easiest to quickly pass through, then the Lib Dems is probably where your manifesto is out. But in terms of policies themselves, as I said, very good. They're quite progressive. Most of them seem to be realistic. I mean, like the Conservatives and Labour, they've fully costed all their policies. And I do believe that if the Lib Dems did get into government, and if they managed to exercise these reforms and exercise them in a good manner, then the UK would generally improve as a society. And that is my thoughts.
Yeah, I feel about the same.
So, when it comes to finding the manifesto, you can find the manifesto as well as separate manifestos for the devolved nations at libdems.org.uk/manifesto. That's libdems.org.uk/manifesto, and as always, it will be in the description. And like the other parties, they have many accessible versions available. Though to be fair, I think the Lib Dems have the most accessible versions, including someone signing the entire manifesto in BSL.
That's cool.
Indeed. So I believe that is all for today's episode.
Indeed.
October, do you have any other thoughts you'd like to add?
Not particularly, no. I think we've covered all bases.
Fair enough. Well, tomorrow we'll be back to you with the Greens and Reform UK and the policies they're proposing in a joint episode, given they have shorter manifestos, so less to discuss. Yes, well, the Lib Dems and Labour both around 120 pages. The Conservatives managed to keep it to 80, while as the Greens and Reform only have 20, so that should be a much simpler episode. So we've got both of them at once. And then it's the day before election, and we're explaining everything you need to know about your vote and how to make it count. So from what to expect when you turn up at the polling station, the people outside asking you your poll number, and also tactical voting, what the polls say, and generally one-stop shop for all you need to know about the UK's 2024 parliamentary elections. And then it's polling day itself. So enjoy the rest of your day, folks. Enjoy the rest of your week. Keep polling day in mind, that's Thursday, 4th of July. Dig those photo IDs out. Remember, they can be expired, but they must still look like you. The name must match your name on the electoral register. All that jazz, which we'll cover later. But thank you very much for listening. October, any final words?
Only keep safe. Thank you for listening. This has been October and Hayden on Co-Political. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Bye-bye.